Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and presented by Rockpoint Bank and EPB. Rockpoint Bank, from Chattanooga for Chattanooga. And EPB, get EPB's fiber optics for the world's fastest community-wide internet. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Mark Kennedy. Mark may be best known for his weekly Chattanooga Times-Free press columns, including the long-running Life Stories. He has been recognized as the Tennessee Press Association's top columnist 15 times. Mark, before we find out how a kid growing up in Columbia, Tennessee becomes a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
Oh, it's black coffee.
Black coffee.
Yeah, and several cups of it. I wake up, and one of the things I do when I wake up is test my voice. I'm at that age where it's a 50-50 chance that I've got this thin, reedy little old man voice or I've got my bass voice. Luckily, this morning when I woke up, I tested it, and I feel like it's more bass than reed today, so maybe I can get through this okay.
Well, with just that, it sounds like you're not a newspaper guy. It sounds like you may have been in broadcasting.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, I had this voice on Sunday for Easter, so I could sing all the bass lines and the hymns at church, which pleased me some. But I'm a black coffee guy. I usually have 4 or 5 cups during the day. I try to stop before sundown, so I can sleep pretty well. But yeah, that's my cup.
So you drink black coffee all day? Man, I stop about 10.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
I don't know. There's just something about my metabolism that seems to need it. So
was that a newspaper thing? I mean, were you a coffee drinker before you got?
Well, I think it has to do with free coffee and the fact that it's free at work. And so it also gets you up from what can be a pretty arduous task, trying to concentrate enough to write.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just look for excuses to walk away from your desk. So coffee's a good excuse.
I enjoy writing, but it is so difficult that most of the writing I do tends to be business writing, but I've always enjoyed just writing. But that sitting down and not having anything come to your head, it's got to drive you nuts.
It does sometimes. And I think in the modern world, too, our minds are more scattered than they used to be. Mm-hmm. I think when I was younger, I had more concentration skills. And now it's so easy just to look away and check your email, to check voicemail, to, completely scroll into something different, look at Facebook. Not that I do that at work, my boss. But there's just constant distraction. There's just other things that you can occupy your mind for 10 seconds or 2 minutes. And then you have to recalibrate, get back into the work, and refocus.
Not to worry if your boss thinks you're surfing Facebook or Twitter or whatever. You're crowdsourcing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you really are. More and more when we write stories, we look for sources on Facebook. Yeah. A lot of times people message you by Facebook, and even LinkedIn has become very popular for professionals to get in touch.
Yeah.
Some people, when I'm trying to reach out to pros to schedule an interview, the only way to reach them is through LinkedIn because they don't publish their cell numbers, and maybe their emails are hard to find or navigate. And sometimes it's just easier to do LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn's really, really blown up in terms of being more of a social network than the business network it used to be. Born and raised Columbia, Tennessee?
Muletown,
the mule capital of the world.
That's what they used to call it. That along with Dimple of the Universe.
Now, that's the one I wanted to ask you about. What is the Dimple of the Universe?
I guess it's just a metaphor for a pretty place, and it is a pretty place. Yeah. Most people that, grow up in East Tennessee were used to the mountains. Middle Tennessee is more rolling hills, is what they call it. It used to be a fairly... not unpopulated. It used to be a lot like maybe Bradley County.
Yeah.
Cleveland, Tennessee, and Columbia, Tennessee are about the same size. I compare them sometimes. But the mule part goes back more than 100 years in the agrarian economy when mules were the engine of farmers. If you didn't have good mules, you didn't have a crop. So some of my forebears were actually mule traders, and they had the biggest mule auction, I think, in the Southeast in Columbia once or twice a year. So all these farmers would come from neighboring states and counties and, get their mule stock up to date. And some of my great uncles were actually mule traders.
So is that what morphed into Mule Day in Columbia?
Exactly. Yeah. I used to march in Mule Day when I was in the high school band.
So what did you do for fun as a kid growing up before you get into high school?
Well, let's see. For fun, I was in athletics. I played Little League baseball. Really, from about the time I was in seventh grade, I guess, I became a drummer. And that carried on through high school. And even into college, I got a scholarship to Middle Tennessee State University, a music scholarship, and was in the Band of Blue there. My senior year, I was the captain of the drum line. But that was sort of a constant for me. And interestingly, I have circled back to that. After putting the sticks down for almost 50 years, I've recently taken up drumming again. So
Wow.
I've got a teacher. I have to practice every week to go to my teacher. My particular favorite kind of music is funk. I don't know, like Earth, Wind, and Fire, Stevie Wonder, 70s sort of R&B soul music.
That's great music.
And so I'm getting instruction on that. I went in yesterday and I said, let's have fun. You just put some songs on and I'm going to play. So I say, play something you think I don't know. Well, he put on Brick House.
Oh, wow.
Which is actually my favorite funk song of all time. And I played to it and he was cocking his head. He had this quizzical look on his face like, you're better at this than I thought. The key to it was it's my favorite song, and I practice it every day.
Yeah,
so I had the cheat code to that particular song. But anyway, back to your question. So I was a drummer all through middle school and high school. I made all-state band, which was a big deal back then.
Oh, yeah.
Still is. Yeah, Columbia band was highly competitive. We competed for state championships when I was in high school. I think it was my junior or senior year. We had 17 band members who were in the all-state band. That would be like having a football team with 17 players, virtually every starter on the all-state team. Imagine that.
Yeah.
And I've always taken some pride in that. There was one particular moment I remember. I got to the tryouts, the auditions for all-state, and walked in and realized I had practiced the wrong music. I had somehow been given the wrong page of the book.
Sounds like someone sabotaged you.
Well, maybe that.
The number two drummer.
Well, it could have been. But anyway, so I had no choice. They just put the music down and I had to what we call sight read in music. It's when you have never seen what you're about to play and you play it. And I played it and apparently played it well enough to make all-state band again. And I thought to myself later, I was a very shy kid, very introverted, and that was kind of the story of the first third of my life probably was overcoming that. But that was one baby step toward gaining confidence. Mm-hmm. I teach a class at UTC now, and I talk a lot to the students about what they can do to take baby steps to get confident about things. Yeah. And that's just one example that I think back of, and not bragging, but that was pretty neat to be able to say that you sight read the material and made all-state band. Now, so, yeah.
What did your parents think about the drums, and what did your parents do?
My mom was the head teller at First Farmers and Merchants Bank in Columbia. An interesting thing about that period, and you're old enough probably to remember this, there was a time when bank tellers were sort of almost public figures.
Yeah.
If you lived in a small town and you banked at the same place, you knew the bank tellers, especially the ones that, like my mom, who had been there for 30 years. So outside of like politicians, she was one of the most well-known people in Columbia.
Most people saw her every week.
Exactly. Yeah. And they felt like she was her friend. It was almost like your hairdresser. You get to know somebody. So she had that very public job. My dad was disabled. He was a veteran of the Korean War. He was a master sergeant, saw lots of battle, had some probably horrific experiences there. One of the things I regret about my life is not having deep discussions with him about his war experience. But that was during a period, I believe, when a lot of people who came back from World War II and Korea were just sort of trained not to talk about it, or at least chose not to. And they were just more
asked about it, they did talk about it.
Right.
A lot of times they said no.
Yeah, they were just.
And it's very generational too.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. And then there was that stoicism that went with that.
Yeah.
Manhood was kind of defined as being able to deal with horrific things like war without having to share them. But I think he probably had what we would call today PTSD, some scars from those psychological experiences. But he was throughout my life disabled, had back injury. He fell down an embankment during the war and had several surgeries that ended up doing more harm than good. And so, that was his situation. So,
did you have siblings?
I have one sister, who actually lives now here. Lives
great.
on Signal Mountain, 2 or 3 miles away from me, which is great.
Yeah. So you're practicing would you practice the drums at home, and would that create?
It would. From the beginning, though, drummers have something called practice pads, which are small, sort of quiet ways to practice the drums without actually hitting a drum. Mm-hmm. It gives you the same rebound with the sticks that you would get if you were doing an actual drum practice, but without all the volume. So that's the way we got away from that a little bit. Now I have a room in my house that is an interior room in the upstairs, and I close all the doors. First day I got my drums, I had one of my sons who doesn't play drums. I said, I want you to sit down here and bang on this as hard as you can, and I'm going outside to see if the neighbors can hear it. So I went outside, and he's banging the drums. I went back in and said, I'm cool, because I couldn't hear a thing. So from that point forward, I feel like I can pretty much play whatever I want to play in my house and not bother anyone.
Did your son banging on the drums cause him to want to play the drums?
No. He's emphatic that he doesn't want to play. And as a matter of fact, he lives at UTC in the dorm now, so he's not home very much. So,
have you written about playing the drums?
A couple of times I've mentioned it. Yeah. But
and don't take this the wrong way. Just on the surface, it doesn't fit what people think of you. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to say your personality, but your image as this columnist who writes these great moving stories about people's lives, and I'm going to go bang out Brick House at this.
Well, yeah, that you mentioned that. I mean, funk drumming is my favorite genre. I'm going to see Earth, Wind and Fire in Birmingham.
That'll be great.
First week in May, and taking some friends down there. But that's the kind of music that kind of makes me feel like my heart's dancing. Yeah, that's the metaphor I use. And so I just love it. I love putting on the music and playing. I was at a lesson yesterday with my drum instructor who specializes in teaching me funk, and he put on Brick House, and I just kind of went to town on the drums and had a great time and left there feeling a sense of joy. Yeah. And so it's meeting the need for me, at this point in life.
So drums get you through high school. They get you a scholarship to MTSU, and I know, having been in broadcasting, MTSU's got a stellar reputation in communications and broadcasting and journalism. Yeah. How did you get into writing?
Well, oddly enough, I was so enthralled with music and band activities during college that I didn't work on the school newspaper, but I took journalism classes. My biggest actually problem in life, probably the first third of my life up until like 30 years old, was this feeling of being very introverted and sort of timid. And so the idea of going out and interviewing people and sometimes in controversial ways or with an adversarial type situation just did not fit my personality, and I didn't think I could do it. So I gravitated towards sports writing, and my first job in journalism was as the sports editor and sports writer at the Cleveland Daily Banner at a time when that county had this huge prep rivalry between Cleveland High School and Bradley High School. And getting to cover that was wonderful. And then becoming a sports editor before I moved to Chattanooga was also my segue into journalism. But I got through that. And one of the things I did in college was sold books, door-to-door Bibles, for the Southwestern Company, which, again, was way against my personality.
Where was this? Where did you do this?
In Bloomington, Indiana. So the training area for Southwestern was actually south of Nashville, around the Brookwood area. It was a big sales company, and they brought you in for training. They had some of the best sales training anywhere, I'm told. Ultimately, I did not succeed. I want to tell you that. I didn't make it through the summer. But again, it was one of those baby steps toward, breaking free of this really constrictive personality I had in order, to go up and knock on someone's door and try to sell them something is about as far out there as you can get in terms of pushing your personality. I will tell you a story. The first door I knocked on, they teach you to knock on the door and take 2 steps back because you don't want to be face-to-face with the homeowner when they come to the door. So I took 2 steps back, fell off the porch into the flower bed. Now, imagine that. Somebody's knocked on your door, you open the door, and, there they are laying on your begonias. Yeah. Anyway, I got invited inside and actually sold what we call the Home Religious Library, which was just a fancy Bible that had all these components to it. And evidently nobody makes a sale on their first call. So I was lifted up and, told I was going to be a great salesman. Well, it didn't turn out. I couldn't sustain it. My personality was too timid to do that.
You didn't fall on every other call. See, that's the lesson I would have taken from it. Is
do it every time.
Sales, I'm going to fall down.
I feel like I would have gotten shot if I had done that.
It's interesting. You talk about being introverted the first third of your life and kind of forcing yourself to get out there. I've never been accused of being introverted, and I've always been more extroverted. But I will tell you, I'm a shy person. Because there is that hesitation until you get comfortable with someone or some situation.
Sure.
And so forcing yourself to do those things really kind of breaks that dam, doesn't it?
It does. And it, like I was saying before with the audition for All-State Band, it's a baby step toward confidence. Again, going back to the class I teach at UTC in feature writing, one of the things I talk to students about is doing anything they can to gain a molecule of confidence, because that's what you want to do. You want to build yourself up. I talk about asking for help. I think that's the most important skill you can have as a human is being to reach out to someone and say, look, I really need your help. I've got a problem. Can you help me solve it? Or I'm in need of this or that. Can you help me? There's something magic about that word. It just softens people's approach to you. It changes the tone in the conversation. It becomes more personal. And I just think it's a life skill that everybody should have. So I tell my students, if they don't remember anything else from feature writing class, remember that Mr. K said, ask for help. Yeah. And remember that until you die, because it's always going to be helpful.
And we talked about this a little bit before, but I couldn't agree with you more. And I came up on the sales end, and I even tell folks today, particularly of my kids' ages, that is the most powerful thing you could do, because 9 times out of 10 it disarms the person you're intimidated by, yes. Whether they're trying to intimidate you or not. They're flattered that you're asking for help, and most people want to help you. Yeah. Most people aren't going to come. No, forget it. I'm not going to help you out, unless you're wanting to rob a bank or something.
It cuts the tension too. You know, a lot of times when you're in a conversation and you're nervous, you never think about the fact that the other person's nervous as well. Well, asking for help changes that dynamic. It makes them feel empowered to actually do something for you, which lowers their tension and makes conversation easier.
So through MTSU, you're taking journalism classes, but you're not working at the school paper or anything. Did you have part-time jobs or do anything like that?
Not so much, but I did get some writing experience in other ways. I wrote some editorials for the newspaper in Murfreesboro. I collaborated with one of my professors on a scholarly work about, he had done research in 1960 about how newspapers handled book review sections and questioned them about that. And he was doing some updated research. I helped him write that and got published in an actual scholarly journal as an undergraduate, which was a nice credit. Yeah. So I was dabbling in it at the same time. I was working in the music department in the library and getting a little bit of money from that. Also, back in those days, working in the summer was a big deal for me. I was lucky enough to have some industrial jobs. I worked at I laugh about this now because it was an unair-conditioned air conditioning plant where I had to stoke a furnace, and it was probably 120 degrees. I was making air conditioning parts, was the irony of all that. And then I worked in an aluminum plant for a couple of years.
That'll make you want to get your college degree, won't it?
It is wonderful, yes, in terms of pushing you forward and nudging you ahead. You know, I like those jobs because they paid well, and I could make enough money in the summer to basically, pay for a lot of my extra things in college throughout. And I was lucky enough to have some scholarships, and because my dad was disabled, I got some Social Security supplements as well. So I came out of college without much debt, which was nice.
That's good. I do want to ask you about, I guess it must have been a high school job. Tell me about the drugstore you worked in. And the note I have that I really want to ask you about is bedpans, condoms, and acid. That sounds like a Grateful Dead song.
How funny. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you were going to bring that up or not.
How could I not?
It was called Derryberry's Drugstore. It was back in those days, most drugstores, and we called them drugstores, not pharmacies, by the way, were small, independent, family-owned drugstores. And so the Derryberry family, Derryberry is what I'm saying, in Columbia owned a drugstore that was down by the square. And I worked there from about the time I was probably in 8th grade through high school. So a lot of the time. And I was just a general laborer. I did anything that they needed to do. If they needed more drug vials in the drawers, I did that. But some of the jobs were better than others. I remember they used to get these big vats, I guess, of acid. And I'm not sure what people even used it for, but I had to pour the acid into gallon milk jugs, which was just the most unpleasant thing you can imagine. These fumes, were coming up in my face. There was no such thing as a mask to wear.
And I just remember, was nowhere to be found.
Exactly. And I just remember my eyes watering. The condoms thing is kind of embarrassing, but if you can imagine not 12, I would have been 13 or 14. Back in those days, you could work a few hours a week at 14. And people would, it was not quite as liberated as it is today in our discussions of sexual matters. Okay. But people would call in and ask, do you have this kind of condom? And I have to go to they were hidden in drawers behind the sections. And I have to pull them out and look for them and then go back and have this public conversation with people. There was more than a couple of times, I'll have to tell you, where somebody called and asked for them. And I said, let me go look, and just never went back to the phone. I was too embarrassed. So yeah, that. And what was the other thing? I can't remember.
Bedpans?
Oh, bedpans, yeah. So this particular pharmacy had a pretty thriving business in, I guess you call it, what would you call it? Hospital equipment? Like when people would go home from the hospital and
like
they would need.
Access Med on Access Roadhouse.
And one of the things they had were that, I guess, potty chairs, that you'd set up behind the bed if you couldn't walk all the way to the toilet. And those would come back in, and it was my job to clean those. And there's something humbling about that kind of work that prepares you for life a little bit, though. Yeah. I think and it's not like it pushes you ahead because you don't want to go back to it. I just think it teaches you to be humble and to understand that every job is noble, no matter what it is. And if you're doing it for money to support yourself, or your family needs it, or you need it, doesn't matter what you do. And I've always tried to keep that in mind. It's one of the reasons that about not halfway through my career, about 10 years into my career, I went to an editor and said, I really don't want to interview newsmakers anymore. I think politicians are not phony, but their lives are don't resemble the lives of most of the people that subscribe to the newspaper. I want to go out and find ordinary people doing extraordinary things. We talked about that a little bit before. And that's where life stories came from. So I've spent over 30 years of my career writing stories about ordinary people in Chattanooga. I've actually sat across the table from, I started to say hundreds, but it's thousands now of people, and talk to them about things that are important. Sometimes it's a challenge they've overcome. Sometimes it's something funny that's happened to them. Sometimes it's just an interesting personality. Last week I was talking to a fellow from North Georgia. He goes by the handle Dad Bod, and he does reviews on social media. His name is Cameron Parker. And he, by day, his day job is
Is he the restaurant guy?
Yeah.
I've watched him. Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Well, he's one of the most pleasant people I've ever met. Yeah. And he was telling me how he got started doing this. He started out doing a cooking show in his backyard, but it was just too elaborate, too much work. And one day he decided he would stop in a little, joint, I guess you'd say, on the side of the road and get a hamburger and sit in his truck and eat it and give a spontaneous review of it. And now he has like 110,000 followers.
Wow.
Routinely gets tens of thousands of views on his TikTok and I guess Instagram accounts. And he's just the coolest guy ever. He specializes in hamburgers, pizza, and barbecue, which to me is the most populous, group of food items you could think of. And he's got his favorites in all those categories. But stories like that just resonate with me, and I think resonate with other people. I teach the class I teach, one of the stories we do, I give them a tape of an interview I did several years ago with a woman named Julia Lufang, who had leukemia. And the story about Julia is that she had this pretty aggressive cancer, and they had to do a bone marrow transplant. And No, I'm sorry, let me correct that, a stem cell transplant. So they had to go to the international registry where people register their stem cells, and they look for a match, and it has to be 100% match. Well, it came back that there was 2 people in the world who were qualified to give her their stem cells. One of them had mad cow disease. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that put them out.
Yep.
So there was one person in the world who was a young father in Germany named Christian. And so they went to him and said, we have this person in need of your stem cells. Will you donate it? I don't know that they even told him he was the only person in the world, but he did. Long story short, the stem cells were transported to the U.S., injected into her body, and it saved her life. So literally the one person in the world who had the power to save her life did. And the rest of the story was they became good friends. She went to Germany and visited him. When I interviewed her, he had come back to meet her and to sample what life in the South was like. I just thought it was the most tender, wonderful human interest story that I'd ever run into, because these people from these vastly different backgrounds, different ages, different countries had come together to do a life-saving task.
Well, and it goes back to what you said earlier. Someone asked for help.
Exactly.
And someone said, I can help you. I don't know you, but I can help you.
That's right. Exactly.
How do they find one person in the world to match a stem cell? I mean,
I guess it's done through DNA matching of some sort. So they put hers in and they put his in, and the computers talk and they figure it out. That's a really silly way of answering it, but that's the only way I know to tell.
Now I know you were taking journalism classes at MTSU, and writing's been a big part of it. Has it always been a big part of your life, like when you were a kid?
I think so.
Yeah.
Interestingly, my dad's first cousin was the publisher of the newspaper in Columbia, Tennessee, the Daily Herald. And my dad, although he never went to college and had this disability I talked about, I was thinking the other day, he subscribed to 4 daily newspapers, the Nashville Tennessean, the Nashville Banner, the Columbia Daily Herald, his hometown paper. And then when I went to work over here, the Chattanooga Times, which was my original newspaper here. So he read from cover to cover 4 newspapers a day. If you think of that, if you do that for your whole life, or a big part of it, your knowledge of current events and just culture at large and life in general is vast. And so he was much smarter than most of the college graduates I knew. Anyway, to get to the point, he would write letters to the local newspaper in Columbia, Tennessee, advocating for different politicians and just basically being wise.
Yeah.
And his first cousin, Sam Kennedy, would answer those letters in a column that he wrote. So they had this give and take that went on for years, and I think had something of a following.
Oh, that's great.
So as a kid growing up and seeing that conversation happen in the newspaper, I think it sort of pushed me in that direction. And then I guess I had a little bit of a facility for words. I remember in junior high school being given a list of vocabulary words and told to write a story about it. And it seems like I could do it just instantly. I could look at the words once and, within a couple of minutes have the story written. And so that taught me that, at least I had conceptual skills to do that.
Do you find that when you start writing, once it starts to flow, that it just keeps flowing and it's not necessarily something you're having to think hard about?
Yeah, I call it a flow state. And once you kind of lock into that, you sort of oblivious to the rest of the world. There are distractions. There are ways that you can get off track mentally more and more as time goes on. And there's so many digital distractions we have. But when I get into flow state, I can usually write pretty quickly. And one of the things I tell people, people that don't write every day imagine that writer's block is a big deal. Knock on wood, it's really not for me. And that's because I realize that what I'm doing is daily journalism. It's not poetry. It's not literature. What I'm trying to do is tell honest stories in a simple way about the people I meet. And so I don't labor over it. I just let my mind talk and try to talk as simply as possible. One time we did a survey to try to figure out what the proper grade level was to write at to get people interested. And we put it through a program, and we discovered that the people here who were acknowledged by everybody in the newsroom as the best writers wrote at the lowest grade level.
I can believe that.
Yeah, it was like 6th or 7th grade, I think. And it was because that transaction is supposed to be simple. You know, in my class, I used to take a ball and I would wind up like I was going to throw a fastball and people would flinch. And I would then throw it softly underhand. I didn't actually throw the ball at them, but then I would switch postures and throw it softly back to the people. I said, this is what writing should be like. It should be the softest exchange of ideas that you can imagine. And by tossing this ball to you underhand in the softest way possible.
That's a great visual.
I want you to understand that and not press, you know, to use big words.
Yeah. You said that you did a survey. What grade level did it come back at?
I think it was 6th grade.
Yeah, that was higher than I thought, quite frankly.
Yeah, but then there were some people that came back, you know, at college level.
Yeah.
But they were the people that everybody thought overwrote and, you know.
Using big words because they knew the big words.
That's right.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes, and it's along the similar lines. I think it's a Mark Twain quote. I would have written you a shorter letter if I had more time.
Exactly.
You know, and I think that gives you the essence of good writing.
It does. Brevity is the soul of wit, too.
Yeah, absolutely. So you get out of school and you go to work in Cleveland. Were you pursuing a journalistic career at that point, or was that kind of like, oh, okay, I kind of like sports, I want to do this?
I don't know that I had a long-term plan. I think sports helped me with my anxiety, although I was still anxious doing that. Yeah. It didn't seem quite as monumental as, you know, covering a trial where somebody's life was at risk or things like that. So it was a way of sort of easing into journalism, although it can get pretty passionate and there's coaches can get pretty emotional after games and things like that. I did enjoy it and got promoted to sports editor there.
How long did you do it?
2 years.
2 years?
2 years. And then came to the Chattanooga Times in 1982.
As a reporter?
Education writer.
Oh, okay.
Did that for a while.
Talk a little bit about those early paper days, because that's when we had two papers.
Yeah.
You had the morning paper and the afternoon paper. And the Times was a little bit more detailed than the Free Press, who I understand had more pictures and community.
It was really two kind of different business models. The Times, the morning newspaper, was considered more liberal, and it had to do a little bit with its ownership. Ruth Holmberg was the publisher of the Chattanooga Times when I worked there, and her grandfather, Adolph Ox, was the publisher of the New York Times. Most people in Chattanooga that have been around a while know that story about Mr. Ox going to New York and purchasing the New York Times and building it into, you know, one of the premier newspapers in the world.
The old gray lady.
That's exactly right. That's what they used to call it, because it was gray. You know, it didn't have a lot of photos in it. But the Chattanooga Times had a lot of those same political sensibilities and was active in the civil rights movement and just generally more liberal and maybe a little bit more urban in its worldview. I guess that's a good word. Maybe not. But anyway, that's what came to mind. And then the Free Press had a different model. It was the afternoon paper. I think it was more of the people. It was a little bit more blue collar. Like you said, at one time, I think there was a staff of over 20 photographers at the afternoon paper, the News Free Press. And they were very much into micro community journalism. I mean, if you were an Eagle Scout, they'd come and take your picture. I really think it was Facebook before there was a Facebook.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, the only way people had notoriety or the ability to tell stories about ordinary people was to put their pictures in the paper. And if your picture was in the Free Press, people knew about it. And if you were a certain strata of people who were active in a lot of different things, your picture may be in there 10 times, you know, in a year.
Well, and from the publisher standpoint, well, we got your picture in the paper and we didn't sell just the copy you always buy. We probably sold 5 more.
Yeah, very, very true. Yeah. So it was a great strategy. So you had the really two choices. But at the same time, the news staffs competed. We had what was called a joint operating agreement, meaning the businesses were combined on the business level, but the newsrooms were set up to compete. So like at the Times, every day around 12 or 1 o'clock, they would bring the copies of the Free Press and put it on your desk. If you're a beat writer and your opponent across the street or down the street, you know, had a story you didn't have, it was your job to follow up on the story. And you didn't want to have to do that much. I think that competition was good. I think it pressed us to work harder and to not get beat and to, just generally perform at a pretty high level. And that went on for the first 17 years of my career until the papers were purchased separately and then merged together in 1999.
And we talked a little bit about this before of how local media really is at a disadvantage now just because of consolidation, because of fewer voices.
Yeah.
We're not able to cover. TV stations don't have someone covering a beat anymore. And I would imagine the newspaper doesn't have the same kind of staff that they used to have.
No, that's true. I think at the time of the merger, if I remember correctly, I think there were about 120 people in the newsroom, which is still a pretty vast news operation for a town this size.
That's a big.
Yeah. I don't know what the current count is, but I think it's between 50 and 60 maybe. Yeah. And that counts all the crafts. That's the page designers and the web producers and all that as well. There's probably a third of those people are actual reporters. But I should say that the Husband family, the Arkansas family and publishers that purchased the Times and the Free Press and merged them has been very generous to the community. They've helped, at the time of the merger, they made some promises about how they wanted this to be one of the best mid-sized newspapers in the country. And I think they've done that. We've consistently been voted, the top newspaper in Tennessee. We've had multiple Pulitzer Prize finalists in the last decade or so. And I think by any measure, we're one of the best medium market newspapers in the country.
I'd agree with you. And I think anyone that frankly complains about our local paper just needs to read a Gannett paper in Nashville or Memphis or Knoxville. Oh, they could just read one of them and never read all three of them because it's all the same news.
That's true.
And we've got a great advantage, I think, in Chattanooga for the fact that we still have an independent voice, as opposed to just running the same stories that Nashville runs.
Yeah, and as you may know, we have 2 editorial pages, which is sort of fantastic if you think about it, because we're the only paper in the country that does that. We maintain, the remnants or the vestigial parts of the Times page and the Free Press and the opposing sort of political strategies and viewpoints.
Yeah, I love that. Now, you're launching your career in the 80s. You're in Chattanooga. Much different town.
Yeah.
How was it different?
Grimy. Yeah. Post-industrial town where they rolled up the sidewalks at night. I mean, it's night and day different. I've got sons. Back in those days, it was assumed that pretty much that, people who went off to college probably weren't coming back to Chattanooga. Now I feel like it's a destination point. Interestingly, I think we're getting to a tipping point where some people locally are starting to say, maybe we're good, Maybe we don't need so many out-of-state transplants. But at the same time, it's making the town more vital. I meet somebody, it seems like every day, from California.
I was just getting ready to say that name.
Moved here. It's different. I was I was doing an interview down on Main Street a few months ago and got caught off in the side streets. And there are like townhome complexes that I didn't even know existed. It's like a whole city within the city down there that it's just not my beaten path, and I didn't know was there. But is showing how, we're getting affluent people who can afford those units to move here.
Yeah, because they're all going up, and all you got to do is drive through North Chattanooga and see what's happened to real estate prices. But you're right, we're getting an influx. What was it like covering the town in the 80s and 90s when it was a grimy, post-industrial, manufacturing jobs have left? We really don't know what we're going to do.
Yeah.
I know the stories are out there, but what was the focus at that time?
I think it was that the city had to pivot. We had to change track. In the early 80s, we were in a recession. And then the economy kind of improved some. And by the late 80s, there was this groundswell of hope that the city could change its act a little bit, with the advent of Chattanooga Venture and the aquarium and all the, the river revitalization that happened. I really do think that was the catalyst for the change that we see today, 40 years later, 30 years later. Anybody who at that time was criticizing that would have a hard time justifying that criticism now, if growth is the end game, and I assume that it is. We've pretty much been on an improvement path ever since then, and a growth path, but not so much growth that it's become a bad place to live.
Yeah, I think everyone would tell you they don't want to be Nashville and they don't want to be Atlanta.
And even Austin, Texas is another city that comes up a lot, that had the same sort of turnaround story, but has gotten a little bit unwieldy.
Yeah, my oldest daughter lives in Austin, and I just got back from there, and it has gotten unwieldy, but I will give them credit. They're not Nashville.
Okay.
I mean, not nearly as bad as Nashville.
Okay.
They have actually found a way to keep they've kept their soul, which I always accused Nashville of not keeping their soul.
Yeah.
That they've just kind of sold it down the river.
I got it.
So you've seen all of this. Do you have any concern of where we're going in the next 10 years?
No, I'm not really concerned in that. I think the economy is going to continue to thrive. I think that, the world-class internet we have has a lot to do with that. I also think the quality of life is high here, and the whole economy has changed. Now, if you like Chattanooga in the most part and you work in a information economy, you can move here and do your job online. So we're getting all these folks that are moving here that are high income, highly intelligent people that are creating a new sort of upper middle class that maybe had gone away some after the decline of manufacturing. So I feel like people will continue to do that as long as property values are more affordable. I think Tennessee's tax advantages help move that along. People want to live here because they don't have to pay income tax, state income tax. So I think all the markers look like they're going up. We just have to be vigilant about keeping the city beautiful, keeping that sense of progress, and that momentum, and frankly, fighting this maybe growing sensation that some people have that we need to shut the door.
Yeah, you can never shut the door, but and I agree with you on that. You've got to you got to welcome people, but you got to be prepared for it too. And as long as we can keep up and do that,
sure.
So you've seen a lot of change, and I want to get into something a little personal for you. You've had a tremendous change in the last year. Do you want to talk about your loss?
Yeah. In August of last year, my wife and I were making plans for retirement. I was getting close to, I was 66 at the time, 67 now. And my wife was 13 years younger. And one morning, woke up, she was getting ready to go to school. The night before, she'd been planning a trip to Africa to go back to Kenya, where she does a church mission, or did a church mission. And out of the blue, she had a brain aneurysm, a severe stroke, and had to be rushed to the hospital, and had multiple brain surgeries over a period of weeks, and passed away the third week in August. It was extremely difficult, obviously, to lose your life partner. I've been grieving that ever since. We have had two sons. One's 24 and one's 19. Beautiful boys, who I love very much. And so dealing with their grief and mine has been difficult. But there are some shafts of godly light in the grief, I think. It's sort of forced me at my age to change my attitudes a little bit. I think all of us, when we get maybe a little bit older, we get settled into our habits and customs. Things like how to make friends kind of goes by the wayside, and we maybe sit alone more than we have to. I actually had a young friend while Weatherly was still struggling for her life in the hospital, who sat down at my desk one day, and just sort of out of nowhere, I had to tell her the story of what was going on. And she said, "But what's good?" And it set me back. I thought it was the most audacious question I'd ever heard. What do you mean, what's good? Nothing's good. My wife's dying.
Just told you what's happening.
Yeah. But I realized that it was a sincere question, and it was just her attempt to give me a breath to, she said I was telling the subject like I was reading it, and she was just trying to get me to, it was almost like a not a hard slap in the face, but just a little bit of
cold water.
Yeah, a little cold water. Yeah. Just, change. Just let's change tracks for a minute.
Yeah.
Let's get out of that loop and what's anything good. And I started to count blessings verbally and started to tell her that every day was good with my sons in the world. And
right.
God is good, and just anything that came to mind that was the most visceral things I could think of. And from that moment forward, I really did try to adjust my life to that way of thinking. To any time I started to spiral down, and I still allow myself to be sad sometimes because you have to do that, but I end up by asking my question, what's good, and trying to make a list of things I'm grateful for. And that's changed my life in so many positive ways. I also made an affirmative decision not to sit with my grief, but to do the opposite, to try to make friends, to ask people for friendship. And I think I've been pretty successful at that. I've got lots more friends than I had before. I say yes to every social engagement I'm asked to or try to.
You said yes to this. I was thrilled.
Okay. Yeah. I like talking about this. And we were talking before, one of the things that has come of it is that I've made a lot of younger friends, and I've become a big advocate for what I call intergenerational friendship. Mm-hmm. A lot of my coworkers at the Times Free Press are younger people. As more of us baby boomers retire, and we're almost all gone now, the newsroom's much more populated with people, frankly, in their 20s and sometimes in their early 20s. And I've become friends with some of them and made friends in my 20s outside of their 20s, not my 20s, outside of work. And I just find a comfort with them because they sort of need life guidance sometimes, need, how do I do my taxes? Or, what do I do? My car's broken, where I need to take it? Just the kind of, things that young people need. And they give me a sort of vitality and a different tack on life. A lot of them are not quite so embedded in politics as most older people are, who seem to be preoccupied with politics these days. I just had, just last night, dinner with a friend of mine, and we sat in the backyard and ate outside and looked up at the trees and talked about what's going on with that poplar tree right there, and reckon when it was born, and the oak tree beside us looked like it was on its last legs. And we talked about that. And at another point yesterday, one of my friends and I walked around my yard, which my wife used to keep meticulously and has all these different flowers in it. And we looked at each flower and tried to determine where it was in its spring journey. And she knew much more about it than I did. But those minutes are just wonderful to me, and they've opened a part of life that is different. I kind of see my life in thirds. The first third was kind of a struggle with personality issues. The second third was raising children, which was also a challenge. My sons were born when I was 43 and 48, so older dad. Yeah. And then this last part of life that's going to be more me on my own, cultivating friends, and doing new things. We talked about drumming. I also do line dancing. I've started a yoga practice, and I'm just determined to get myself out of the house.
Well, and it's not what you planned, because you were talking about planning retirement, you and your wife, Thom, and we all have these, this is what we're going to do when we get the time, and all of a sudden it's taken away from you. I can't imagine the void.
It's tough, but I've found a richness in life after.
Yeah. I like what you said about, what's good and the power of gratitude.
Yeah.
It's big. It's so easy to not to focus on what we don't have or the things that aren't happening. But when you focus on the things that are good, it really does adjust something in you.
Yeah. And just going back to the intergenerational stuff like that, I don't think a friend my age would have asked me that question.
Yeah. Yeah.
They would have just sat with me in grief and tried to be supportive, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
But sometimes it takes the audacity of youth to break you out of things.
Well, and another thing you said about having that intergenerational friendship, you've got younger friends who may not know how to do their taxes, and that a lot of times they don't want to ask their dad or their mom. That they're going to go to someone that they respect and have a friendship with and say, hey, man, help me through here.
Yeah. And sometimes it works both ways.
Right.
You and I were talking earlier about sometimes we have to caution ourselves that if we have young friends that we have confidence in and talk about real life stuff, we've got to do the same thing with our own children.
Exactly.
I think that sometimes we are too reticent to get into deep conversations with our kids because we see them more as our children, not our friends. And there's a pivot point in their lives where they need to be more like our friends and less like our children.
Well, and also we play a role. Yeah,
Sure.
I'm the dad. I've got to be strong. I got to know
right.
this. I got to do this. You're going to
things,
I got to
right?
fix it for you.
Yeah.
But and I forget where I heard this. And it's the joy in life is when your kids end up being adults you want to hang out with. Yeah,
I agree with that. I agree with that totally.
Yeah.
But it's hard to get there sometimes. I'm not sure why.
Oh, 2 teenage girls, it was really hard to get there.
I bet it was.
I forget who I told us. They went to GPS, and GPS has this big thing about we build strong women. I thought, man, that's great, until I got them in there and realized what a strong woman teenager was. I didn't like it at that point.
How fun.
Yeah. So how are you doing now?
I feel like I'm doing well. I'll have to say that. I still have tough days, and sometimes I'll have, memories of marriage and recent fatherhood, and now that I'm home alone some, again, I'm trying to avoid that as much as possible. But I think all things considered, I'm doing well. I mean, the fact that I feel comfortable here today with you to share some of this stuff, and I do it at any point I can. I help teach a Sunday school class, and sometimes we talk about things like that. I just feel like community is so important right now in the broader society. I feel like we as Americans, we need to find joy and friendship outside of public institutions, outside of politics. We have so much in common, and if we just go around and ask people for help, not to be Pollyanna, but I believe that people will answer that in the affirmative, even if you have different beliefs about who you vote for or what political party you support. Let's come together.
Well, our last 20 years, we've been put in camps.
Yeah.
You're either red or blue. Yeah. And we're not. We got more in common, as you said, than we have differences.
And the further you retreat from that, and I hate to say this as a member of the media that, has to report on news, and justly so, but sometimes you need a break from news. You need to turn off the TV. I know you were in TV news, but sometimes it can get so dark and repetitive that you get in these thought loops that everything's bad. And I mean, to wrap things up a little bit, one of the joys of my life has been talking to individuals across a table like you and I are right now for 40 years. I mean, if I could go back and script a life for myself, having true human interchanges with people for all those decades, telling their stories and maybe even lifting them in a little way. I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, but it almost feels a little bit like a ministry. Yeah. It feels like, that maybe I'm being used a little bit as an instrument to help people. And
I get that. I spent 35 years in broadcasting, and I was on the sales and the administrative side. I was never on what we called the talent side. Doing this podcast has been the most fun I've had.
See?
Yeah. And we've talked to 170 something people now, so we got 170 hours of conversations, and I enjoyed every one of them. Yeah. And when someone says, "Well, what's your favorite?" I said, "I don't know." I mean, they're all favorites for different reasons.
Sure.
But that interaction and being able to connect with someone, I think, is what we do miss with the current media platforms. Because you're having information thrown at you that we forget that if you just sit down and have a cup of coffee and a conversation, you probably learn something you didn't know.
Absolutely.
And make a friend.
Yeah. And all you have to do is say yes when people ask you to do things. Ask for help when you need that. And most importantly, you can actually ask for friendship. Yeah. That's one of the things I've tried to do. And it sounds kind of weird to people sometimes, but sometimes if I meet somebody and I feel like that there's a possible friend in there, I'll ask them to have coffee or something. And then I'll pop the questions. I'll say, "I really enjoy talking to you. Do you mind if I call you a friend? Yeah. And could we cultivate that friendship?" And I've yet to have anybody turn me down. Maybe that's just saving face and maybe they don't want to, but I really feel like that everybody's looking for connection. Yeah. And as long as you go into it as an honest, broker and that you want to give as a friend as well as get, I think most people are open to that.
You know what's ironic is how connected the world is today and how disconnected we all are.
Absolutely.
You know, it's a paradox.
Because we're not honest. Because what we post on social media is not asking for help. It's like, it's look at us, how successful, where my vacation is, and how beautiful my family is. And we all are proud of that. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with sharing it. But most of us know that that's not what real life feels like 24/7.
Yeah, yeah. What do they call it online? Humble brag.
Exactly. It's not so humble, though.
No. You can see right through it. Before I get to the last question, Mark, I want to remind our listeners who makes My Morning Cup possible, and it's a big thank you to our presenting sponsors, EPB and Rockpoint Bank. Get EPB fiber optics for the world's fastest community-wide internet, and Rockpoint Bank, your local banking partner, your business, your bank, your future. Last question for you. What would you tell that 25-year-old Mark Kennedy is important for a happy life?
That's a good question. I've actually thought about that some. I wish I could go back and talk to that guy because he was pretty unhappy. Drank too much, was too focused on job and not focused enough on other things in life, had sort of lost contact with faith, and was sort of adrift, and could have gone two directions, could have gone into a bad path that probably wouldn't be alive today, or could have turned it around. And I'm not sure what caused it. Well, I guess I do. At the end of that, I was drinking so much it was making me sick. And my body started to kind of tear down some. And so I would tell that guy to be careful about drinking, but also that even when things look dark, they can be turned around, that there is, and you don't have to hit bottom to do that. You just have to change your mind about how you want to live. And so by the time I was 30, I had broken free from that largely and began to build my life in a different way, And that was the only other period in my life where I asked for friendship and started asking people to be friends. And it worked then, and it seems to be working now at another sort of low point in my life. Mm-hmm. So I guess that'd be my ending message for people is ask for help, ask for friendship. Well,
and you say very openly you were an introvert, but that's such a non-introvert thing to do because at least my perception of the easy thing for the introvert to do is to just go within himself and keep that grief to themselves. No, I'm fine.
Yeah, that's right. That's your first instinct, and you have to break through that. And the way I've described breaking through it is taking baby steps, is doing little things that will help you gain confidence until you get to the point where you can go through the door and do the hard stuff to get better.
Yeah. I've enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you taking the time to do it. I enjoy your columns.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love, as you know, I love just hearing stories that because everyone's got a story. That's the thing. People say to me, and I'm sure they say the same thing to you. Don't you ever run out of people you want to talk to or run out of subjects?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
There's one on every corner.
Yeah. So the definition of a story is a character that has a conflict that gets resolved. Show me a human that hasn't had a conflict that they had to resolve. That's what their story is. And so my life's been full of conflicts. I hope I'm in the process in my later years of resolving most of them. And the act of resolving makes me feel good.
Well, thank you for doing this. I've enjoyed getting to know you better. I hope we can share a cup of coffee without a microphone sometime.
Let's do it.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Costa Media Advisors. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.